Welcome back to the class, everyone. Take this as your very inconsistent reminder that you need to sign up for GAC, assuming you watch this within the first 8 or 10 hours or so. That being said, it is 3v3, and while I do really enjoy the change-up, I realize it's not everyone's bread and butter. So in today's video, we're going to try to help you out in sorting all the teams that we have for 3v3. Well, not exactly all of them. We're going to be doing 42, not including Galactic Legends, because, I don't know, I feel like most people don't want to watch an hour-long video. But without further ado, let's get into the very top of the ranking here. We do not have this sorted into offense or defense, so we're going to have to try to cover that as we go along. But starting with the S tier, what really defines this category is whether or not they need a Galactic Legend to beat them, or whether or not they have a shot or an outside shot at another Galactic Legend. And starting out the list is going to be both Gungans and Queen Amidala. This is a little bit of a shot in the dark because this is the first season of 3v3 where we do not have a Datacron specific to either of these teams. That being said, we've seen them do some really gross things in a multitude of game modes. I'm not sure how much they absolutely need those Datacrons. I know that Gungans themselves will start to get beat by Darth Bane a lot easier now that they don't have the shield generator to keep coming back. That being said, Darth Bane to beat that team is still a pretty high caliber. Darth Bane will beat about half the Galactic Legends, if not more, out there. Queen Amidala, very similar analysis. I actually think people are going to be shocked at how much Gas is going to struggle to take this team down, because not only did Queen Amidala lose her specific Datacron, but he himself did too. So again, there's going to be still a pretty big learning curve with these two teams, where even if we do eventually figure out a really good counter, I think they're going to hold a lot of defensive viability towards the beginning of the season. Starkiller is here. The floodgates for Rey have essentially been reopened, and they really never closed if you're not really doing a lot of things with Datacrons. It is a little bit more nuanced because you don't have as much leeway, because Rey can more easily one-shot a character because her damage is more compacted against 3 enemies rather than 5, but still a very solid counter all the way around. Inquisitors flourishing in 3v3. They're good in 5v5, but you pretty much lose the Phoenix counter entirely to them, making them a great option for defense, where they have really convenient solutions, again, like Darth Bane. Not the Inquisitors, but the Sith Empire is also going to make the top end of this list. They do have a pretty good shot at beating Jedi Master Luke in 3v3, which would be the Galactic Legend they would beat. But at the same time, most people aren't leaving that on defense. But if you can figure out a way to drain your opponent's Cal Kestis, assuming they even have one to begin with, Darth Malgus is still a pain in the butt to take down on defense, especially if you're willing to give him a more premium team like this one with Darth Revan and Bastila Shan Fallen. If you're wondering, what the heck do you do with Malak? Pretty much anything you want. You can put him with Sith Eternal Emperor, you can run him as a solo, you can stick him in a random team to annoy someone. He just does that. He's very good at that job. Next up, we're going to be the Unaligned Force Users. Again, still holding up very well in 3v3, despite the fact that they don't have the rest of their team. The amount of stat gains and immunities that they have based off of both Terran as well as Seer's Kit really just affords them a lot of viability to beat the stronger teams like Inquisitorius, like Rey that we talked about previously. The Weird Sith Trio, which, by the way, I really do need to hype up Trey. I hype up Trey a lot. We're just going to keep doing it, though. This is the only team on this upper echelon S tier we have that doesn't have either a modern legendary, like one that came out in the last year or two, or a conquest character. Pretty much every single one of these other teams is being held up by one of the two things. I guess Starkiller might be a little older than 2 years now, but close enough. So the fact that Trey, I mean, she does require 2 Omicrons to do this, but it's really impressive that on defense, there really aren't a lot of great non-Galactic Legends solutions to this team. So sticking on defense is great, and then it also beats like 75% of the teams out there on offense, so it just makes for a great option. Next up is Bo-Katan Mandalore, who really, any variation of her team will just kind of slap Lord Vader very well. I have been really liking putting Beskar Armor Mando here rather than the tank Paz, just because he ends up doing a lot more damage. He can provide a lot more coverage for IG-12, and honestly, just having another cleanse versus Lord Vader ends up being pretty nice. And lastly is going to be Bane, who I don't really need to hype up at all. You all know why he's good. You all know why he's here. He is essentially the Sith Galactic Legend. Sorry, Sith Eternal. Next up is going to be the A tier. Now, I really don't want to badmouth any of these teams in any way, because as you probably know, you're going to need more than 9 teams at the very top of, or really anywhere in Kyber, you're going to need 30 teams total. So you are also going to need every single one of these A-tier teams if you're willing to perform at a very high level. Obviously, if you don't have it, maybe it could be a goal to work towards depending on what you have in front of you. Now, first up is going to be General Skywalker. And I'll be honest, I debated putting General Skywalker in the higher tier for a while, just because the only 2 things in this own tier that really count on him is going to be Maul and Padme. And a lot of times people end up putting these 2 different characters, Cat and Maul, with their respective Galactic Legends, essentially meaning that the only thing that people are really using to beat gas is a Galactic Legend or a stronger team. But it's kind of nuanced at that point, especially because a lot of people are taking the premium clones, as in Rex and 5s, and putting them on an entirely different team. So overall, he's going to end up here, but if it makes you feel better, he's an A tier plus character. Next up is going to be the Saw team. We don't really 100% know where this is going to land right now. I like Luthen and Captain Drogon because, again, we're not assuming Galactic Legends, so Leia wouldn't be in here just for the sake of this list. I think between both of their Omicrons and the amount of things that are going on with Luthen's Datacron right now, it's probably safe to assume that they're going to be a pain in the butt to take down on defense. We don't, again, fully know because the amount this has been tested is very little. If you're looking for another option that isn't Drogon because you're running Leia, Kyle Katarn is probably your choice just because we want to have an actual attacker in there. I don't think that the tank is as important when you have Luthen running on the Saw team, because Luthen himself, he will put up the Rebel Trooper who will pretty consistently mark itself, and you really want your enemy to be wasting all their hits on a character that can just be resummoned. See Geos or Queen Amidala more recently for why that's a good thing. Next up is going to be Aphra. Aphra really can't beat a lot of Galactic Legends in 3v3 on her own, but if you are in a cleanup, she pretty much beats every single one of them. This has been very important, especially for when we get these defensive heavy Datacrons where you can't just instantly one-shot the enemy team. She's gotten a lot of help in that regard. Next up is going to be the Tusken team, and this is a very specific to this Tusken team. Why it's so good is because Tusken Chieftain and Tusken Warrior really kind of crap on any and all turn meter mechanics out there, or turn meter gain for the enemy team, I should say. And then Tusken's Raiders Omicron, giving strength in numbers, just allows you to, again, have another summon that people are just going to end up wasting all their hits on. And if you don't have any type of anti-revive to kill the original Tusken, the whole thing is just a huge pain in the butt. And typically, what team ends up being required to kill this is General Skywalker, assuming they have it tricked out with everything here. If they have another variation like Boba Fett, or maybe these guys aren't leveled up all the way, or maybe they don't even have Tusken Chieftain, the options start to open up. But the premium team really is along the A tier. Next up is going to be the Fin Zori team. I hate this team so much, and in a good way, in a way that you should put it on defense, because like me, your opponent will run into it, it will get away from them. Every single one of them has a cleanse. They still have so much turn meter despite the fact that there's only 3 of them. Anyways, it's super annoying. And it can do things on offense too, but it's mostly an annoying defense team. Next up is going to be Maul, partnered with Imperial Super Commando and Gar Saxon, who are now doing quite a bit ever since Imperial Super Commando got a rework that allows him and Gar to do a ton of true damage whenever they attack at a turn, which Maul kind of does that like 6 or 7 times in a row, depending on where you are in the fight. Next up is going to be Padme with Commander Ahsoka Tano. Again, this is assuming you don't have JMK to use. This does beat General Skywalker. Again, a pretty premium team that we talked about before. It can beat a few others. You can also leave it on defense because Malik turns out can't solo teams that can insta-kill him, which is pretty great for you. Next up is going to be Malgus Killer, and while there are several different variations of Cal Kestis teams you can use to kill Darth Malgus, I really like this one because it does really well for a very low cost. Now, you don't have to use Plo Koon, but pretty much any Jedi with the tank tag under Bastila Shan is going to be starting taunting, meaning that Cal Kestis can really do what he wants. He doesn't have to worry about Malgus going in and one-shotting him right away, and saves you from using, again, a more premium character like Jedi Knight Revan or Jedi Knight Luke to control the battle. You can use them as well, but this has been an option that I've quite enjoyed, especially for the weaker Darth Malgus teams. Now, next up is what we're going to be doing with the rest of the Jedi, and I felt it important to maybe call this out a little bit. This is actually a pretty good SLKR counter that is probably even more alive now that SLKR no longer has his Kron. Jedi Knight Revan Lee, Jedi Knight Luke, and then the armor form a formidable team that can help you take out SLKR. The whole concept behind this team is that armor will get 3 stacks of Beskar armor towards the beginning of the fight, because while Revan will drop below 100% health, or to 1% health, I should say, that will trigger her 3rd stack of Beskar armor, which she can then put on him, and then SLKR will hard target him, but will not be able to kill him because you can't crit him, and SLKR's damage is significantly hampered the second he can't be critting things left and right, and then Jedi Knight Luke is the one who's actually there to deal the damage and take him out. Last but not least is going to be Dark Trooper, Moff Gideon, Scout Trooper, and Moff Gideon. This team has been a huge pain in the butt. I've seen it at a lot of lower levels, and when I say lower levels, I mean Kyber 3, Kyber 5, so really not that low at all. Adarad is actually still taking this team to town, just completely destroying it. I have not had that consistent of a time against this. We have won quite a few, but I will say the ones we have won, gosh, is it a sucky battle. Like the amount of times that my buffs get stripped away, or I don't have the anti-revive thing guaranteed, or there wasn't just enough offense and I have to rely on an AoE to proc exposes afterwards. It's just a mess. So the team is pretty good. And again, with the anti-turn meter mechanics that it has, similar to the Tusken team, it can also be used on offense. So it's really not a dud by any stretch of the imagination. Next up, we're going to be the B tier, which is again still the bread and butter for a lot of people out there. First up being Iden Versio, who you will notice she doesn't really have the problem of having to split her troopers, because in 3v3 there's actually enough to go around. Great counter for both Mon Mothma as well as CLS, which CLS is still pretty common to find on defense. Next up is going to be Admiral Raddus, who pretty much beats Hayden, who we just specifically mentioned, as well as the Dark Trooper Moff Gideon, and even some other teams that are Empire susceptible to daze. Not exactly Emperor Palpatine and Starkiller, because they're not susceptible to daze. Next up is going to be CLS, pretty common defense team. This one's tricky because it's always had several options to beat it on defense, but I feel like if you just get the right amount of stats on either CLS or Chupio in regards to tenacity or protection or whatever you're trying to do, you can start to isolate which ones of the counters are going to work. Like for example, if he has a ton of protection, different from mine, you start to close out the Imperial Trooper counter with Veers, or maybe if you have a lot of tenacity like mine, you start to count out the Bad Batch counter. So there's just kind of different ways to isolate it. It's really not a bad team by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of fallen over time because people have just learned how to beat it. Speaking of Bad Batch, they're going to come up here. They don't beat everything nowadays, but they do beat a handful of things that can be pesky to get around. Next up is going to be Hondo, along with Chewbacca and Han. You really don't need Hondo in the leadership spot here. I realize he does not have a leadership, but the fact that he is a scoundrel and he's going to get bonuses from his 2 friends being scoundrels or smugglers or whatever the clause is for his Omicron. Yeah, it looks, oh, it's either or. He's going to be able to get turn mirror in the very beginning, and there's just something really nice about being able to captive one enemy, stun the other one that's going to go first, and then stun the third character, and you pretty much have the entire team under control before they even get to take a turn, and then you can keep spamming stuns with Chewbacca and Han, and it's just overall a pretty good time. We've used the punch up against some higher things, but ultimately, I mean, you can put whatever lead you want in with Han and Chewbacca, and you can get good results. Wedge, Greedo, Kira, there's plenty of other good options out there. Next up is going to be the Qui-Gon Jinn team, and this is actually better defensively in 3v3 than it was in 5v5, because it just becomes a lot harder to control Jedi Anakin when you have less characters that can stun or ability block or fear or whatever it is. In 5v5, Bad Batch have a lot more resources to be able to do all those things that I just mentioned. In 3v3, not so much, and the likelihood that Jedi Anakin gets his big AoE off and just slaughters your entire team is a lot higher. Especially when you consider using all 3 of these characters, he still has the most amount of damage you can have, because Ki-Adi-Mundi is there to give more speed, which therefore boosts his offense more. Qui-Gon Jinn's going to boost his offense out the wazoo, and then hopefully you have him modded for crit damage for maximum damage. Next up is going to be GL Newt, along with Jango and B1. There are other variations of Newt. I've actually enjoyed using Magma as a third on this team too, just for the tank. But if you're using this offensively, the AI is often really bad, and honestly, they don't have a lot of good options to go after. But a lot of times they'll just throw hits into Jango that'll get them nowhere. They'll put big hits into B1 that just don't go through a lot of stacks, or maybe they even go for Newt right away, despite the fact that he's going to revive instantly. So presents a lot of issues, and actually has become one of the main counters to the Qui-Gon Jinn team right above it. Next up is going to be Imperial Troopers. They fall a little bit from grace in 3v3 just because there's not as much turn meter there, but honestly, Veers, Piet, and Dark are still doing quite a bit of the work. We kind of mentioned the counter to CLS that they can be a little bit earlier, but overall, they do kind of struggle in 3v3. Speaking of other rebel counters that have to do with Empire, I guess Mon Mothma's up next. Mon Mothma, again, also is going to struggle a lot. She definitely does like having her 2 other turn meter generators with Hoth Rebel Scout and Pow in the team. 3v3 doesn't really support that luxury because if she has them, then she doesn't really have anything else. And you're better off going with a little bit of damage and a little bit of character to buy you some time with Cara Dune. Next up is going to be Dash. Again, this team is good, but very similar to the CLS team. It's kind of been figured out. Everybody knows that you don't go for L3. You have to go around her to go to Vandor. Use a basic Jedi Knight Revan team with maybe Grandmaster Yoda. Nothing too fancy, in the words of Obi-Wan, to be able to take it down. And overall, I mean, you can still mod it and trick it out to be a pain, but a lot of people know what they're doing against it. Next up is going to be Wampa, a character who actually has retained a lot of value in 3v3, despite not really having retained as much in 5v5. Still a good counter to the trooper team up here with Iden Versio, as well as a few other things. Actually, there's a really small outside chance, I shouldn't say really small, but a decent chance against Starkiller if you genuinely know what you're doing and you get lucky with one of the counters to get yourself enough turn meter to wipe off the tenacity down before everything starts to come down on top of you. Next up is going to be Night Sisters. This team probably needs to be higher, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just being like vengeful at this point. I have not gotten them to work against Jabba at all. I mean, even killing the sides, I've struggled. So maybe this is a skill issue on my part, and they should be in the A tier category. But I've struggled to have them do anything super cool. Also, Gear 12 Mother Talzin might be a problem. So hopefully that'll change once I get a Night Sister Datacron at this time around. Next up is going to be a Rex 5s, actually. This team, I don't have a whole lot of respect for it just because it got figured out almost immediately, meaning that Qui-Gon Jinn has a very high win rate against it, even when proccing the sacrifice on the other Rex. There's just too much damage here. But for the vast majority of people who don't have the luxury of throwing that team out, or maybe they didn't get Cam when he came in his pack round, it's going to be a really difficult team because there's a lot of recovery on it. And if you do trigger the 5-sack, Rex is just going to take so many turns and still be very hard to kill. And then last but not least is definitely going to be the Trench team. Trench team is actually probably a little bit stronger than this season, but right now with the Datacron for Wat Tambor, the whole thing is a huge mess to take down. There really isn't a right option to go after first. You want to go after Wat Tambor so he doesn't revive, but every single time you do, you're pretty much allowing Trench, due to his unique, to gain a ton of turn meter, because whenever you hit one of his non-droid Separatist allies, he has a 50% chance to get 100% turn meter and then just kind of mess you up, especially because him and Dooku can just kind of stun lock the entire team. If you do go for Admiral Trench, you don't have an anti-revive, Wat Tambor will revive him, and it's kind of a lose-lose unless you have a team that just has higher qualifications and can manage that. Now, lastly is going to be the C tier, and I honestly do not hate any of these teams. They're all good, but they should be viewed, as we've talked about before, transitionary teams. These are teams that you use when you have to and you've kind of run out of other good options. Now, I probably shouldn't say that right now because Jedi-Crons are going to make this team probably very good, or maybe Eve Koth actually replaces Grandmaster Yoda. But ultimately, this just has everything that makes a good team. You have a good damage dealer, you have a good lead, and you have a good tank. This team really should be able to do things. I just can't give you exactly what it's supposed to be countering. So maybe it should be higher up, but overall, it's just a solid team. Boba Fett is going to do similarly scary things. Doesn't exactly have that exact formula, but there's a lot of thermal detonator synergy within his leadership where they're going to gain a ton of turn meter. Zam's Omicron is going to let them go before most teams. Once you start applying more debuffs, you'll gain even more speed, and it can make the team very hard to track. General Grievous really doesn't do so hot in 3v3. He wants to be able to abuse more droids, and he only has 2 to abuse in 3v3, so it makes it a lot easier to just kill 1, kill 2, kill 3. But overall, I mean, it's still a team you can put on defense if you're trying to strip a few banners. Next up is going to be JTR with R2 and BB-8. Again, kind of a good control team. They lack a lot of damage, and you can time out with them if you're not careful, or the battle just goes too long and they end up killing BB-8 and the whole thing kind of falls apart. Still a decent team. Next up is going to be Sortie, T3, as well as Lobot. The team, again, doesn't really have all the makings of a good team, but they do have quite a few things. They can be annoying. There's a lot of turn meter. There's a lot of exposes, a lot of things like that. Not really enough to make them a super dangerous threat, but still worth using if you geared up Lobot due to Leia, and Sortie due to Leviathan, and T3 mid-forward due to Jedi Knight Revan. So the free team that a lot of people have that you might not be utilizing, and you should be, given the fact that you probably don't have all 9 of the S tier teams. Next up is going to be Geonosians. Solid team. Not amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but you can use them if you don't have one of the higher level teams. Next up is going to be the Bosk, and then double, I don't know what to call them, double mercenary, Boba Fett, and the Mandalorian team. What I really like about this one is it's pretty much a guaranteed contract, assuming the enemy team doesn't have what it takes to just annihilate you right off the bat. Bosk, he wants to hit the weakest target at all time, and even if there's a taunt in their stealth, Boba Fett, Sign of Django, is just going to be able to spam AoE after AoE after AoE after AoE to be able to get them. And then when they do come out of that stealth, even if there is a taunt, the Mandalorian can avoid it and then call in Boba Fett, Sign of Django, and you can get contract against some pretty good teams out there. In fact, the Night Sisters team we talked about, Mandalorians are a pretty, or not the Mandalorians, but the Bounty Hunters are a pretty great counter to it, because as long as you don't trigger a death and give them instant defeat immunity, you can just start zapping them off by getting contract rather quickly. Next up is going to be Hux. This is just me trying to make use of the First Order TIE Pilot on Macron, which again, not super, but it's still a team you can use. If they have something weaker on defense and you can throw this in, go first. Call the Mass Assistant, just kill one of the enemy characters right off the bat. It can be pretty good. Next up is going to be Wookiees, who unfortunately aren't really required at relics for the most part, so it becomes a harder team to make. Or I just picked the 3 that aren't at relics. I mean, these are all used in different teams, so that's probably the main issue here. But overall, they can be good if you're willing to put the investment into them. The issue is I probably just wouldn't for the vast majority of people, unless you're a Wookiee enthusiast, and then power to you. So that is going to be our top 42 teams for 3v3 JC. I will throw in the fact that we still don't really know where these 2 teams are going to be, just because they are brand spanking new and we don't really have anything on them. And different from Luthen, where we kind of know what the Team C goes in to do, we really don't know what these 2 are going to do in 3v3. Enoch will probably be good at the worst, and Great Mothers are probably going to be great at the worst. They're probably more likely going to be amazing, assuming you do have their Datacron and they're not purple like Monarch, but are actually reliced up. So thank you guys for watching, and as always, stay awesome.